about the structure of the Arizona government. I actually have no credentials to do this. I am a dilettante. I've done many things in my life, but what happened is that in December of 2016, after the presidential election, I was enraged, confused, all the things that a lot of people were after that election. And I started hearing, I mean, I had had really good sort of basic federal civics education in elementary school, believe it or not, in Pennsylvania. And I started hearing people say things, and I thought, I don't think that's right. And so I started, just as a way of allaying my anxiety and had to have something to do, because I was retired. I couldn't go to work, you know. So I sat there and I started to make notes for a script to talk about the structure of the federal government. And I thought, oh gosh, I can't stop at the federal government. I've got to do the Arizona government, about which I knew practically nothing, even though I had been here for 28 years. So I had always voted, but I could not have told you what legislative district I actually lived in. So I started to put together this script, and I have given it 21 times since April of 2017, and I've talked to over 500 people. I'm going to talk to you about the structure of the government. Brenna Koch, who I will let introduce herself as to what her credentials are to be talking about, is going to talk about the RTS system and do a training in how to use the RTS system, because using it is not difficult. Getting activated on it is a two-step process, and it requires a little bit of hand-holding. So I just want to talk about the handout for a minute. A bunch of handouts I've given you. The first one, the one that's stapled, is simply a 2-page structure in outline form of the Arizona government, the branches of government, a little bit about the request to speak system, and a little bit about voter initiatives and referenda. The second page is a list of really good links, and they are everything from how you register to vote to how to find out about request to speak. And this, of course, includes my federal information, too. So it's got the Declaration of Independence on it. It's got the Arizona Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, and a lot of other things. On the back of the links page is a screenshot of my voter ID card telling you what these numbers mean. And this is important because I kept having to pull it out and remind myself what LD I lived in. Your voter ID card will have the same information. You can get this information also on the Pima County Recorder's website, which is, because we're a big populous county, we've got this terrific website that some of the rural counties don't have, where you can go in and put your driver's license ID number or your voter ID number and your name and your date of birth, and Shazam, they will give you all this information along with a lot of other information, such as what were the last elections you voted in going back some years. It will tell you if you have mailed in your permanent early voting list ballot, your early ballot. It'll tell you whether it's been received, whether it's been processed. It's got a ton of information on it, so I love that Recorder's website. But I want to just give you some facts about Arizona. Arizona Territory was authorized to hold a constitutional convention in 1910, and they wrote the Constitution and submitted it to the U.S. Congress. The original Constitution was approved by Congress, but it was vetoed by President Taft because it had a provision about citizens could recall judges, and Taft didn't like that. So they took that out of the proposed Constitution. It passed, President Taft signed it, and we became a state on February 14th, 1912. Now, here's some fun facts to wow your friends and family with. As a matter of interest, in the very first general election after that, which was November 5th, 1912, there was a initiative on the ballot restoring the recall of judges. Another thing that's very interesting, the very first citizen initiative in this state, that same date, November 5th, 1912, was women's suffrage, allowing women the right to vote. And that was 1912. So we're not as backwards as some people would make us think. So that is just some fun facts. The Constitution, just like our federal Constitution sets out the structure of our federal government, our Arizona Constitution sets out the structure of our state government. And we have the normal 3 branches that you're used to, the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. Arizona's got 2 bonus entries, though, and that is the Arizona Corporation Commission and the Independent Redistricting Commission, and I'll touch on those. We can amend our Constitution. It is far easier to amend it through what is called direct democracy. There's only a handful of states, there's us and 5 other states that have this level of direct democracy in terms of initiating legislation, initiating constitutional amendments, and repealing legislation. Every state's got some element of that, but there's only the 6 states that have all those elements, which is really remarkable, and it's a very Western state kind of a thing. So that's good to know. The Arizona Constitution has been amended. Can anyone say how many times as of 2014? Just throw out a number. How many times has the federal Constitution been amended? Do we know that number? It's a small number, 2 digits, 27. So the Arizona Constitution has been amended 152 times as of 2014, and there have been a few since then. So it's not hard to change the Constitution of Arizona. It is easier than it is in most other states. Okay, so I want to talk quickly about the legislative branch, which is what you would think it is. It is the governor and 6 other elected officials. Arizona Corporation Commission's got 5 members in staggered terms: a Secretary of State, a State Mine Inspector, Superintendent of Public Instruction, Treasurer, and Attorney General, in addition to the governor. With very few exceptions, the qualifications for running for a state executive office is the following: 18 years old, citizen of the U.S., citizen of Arizona, and able to read and write English. So there's hope for all of us. We can be running all very soon. Okay, so the governor of Arizona is elected for 4 years, and he's term limited to 2 consecutive terms. Doug Ducey was elected in November of 18 for his second 4-year term. There is no office of lieutenant governor in Arizona, and it's one of only 4 U.S. states that doesn't have a lieutenant governor, although perennially there is a bill to create a lieutenant governor. It never goes anywhere in the state legislature, and there's one right now active. You can sign into RTS and put your thumbs down. So what happens in most states, of course, is there's a ticket. There's a governor and a lieutenant governor, and they are elected, and if the governor has to leave, the lieutenant governor steps up. What Arizona has is 2 different elected officials who can be, of course, of 2 different parties. So that's why we ended up with Jan Brewer after Janet Napolitano went off to Homeland Security. That's how we ended up with the fabulous Rose Mofford after Evan Meacham was impeached. And in fact, another fun fact to amaze your friends and family with is that because of a string of deaths in office, resignation, and 1 impeachment, Arizona has not had a governor whose term has ended and begun because of normal elected circumstances since, what year do you think? 1975. Now, wow, that's the jaw dropper, isn't it? So that means either someone was elected but they left office in some weird way, they died, they were impeached, they were indicted, whatever, or they came in that way, which is not normal, and then they left in the normal way. So that's a remarkable statistic, I think. So the governor has the duty to enforce laws and the power to approve and veto bills, just as any normal, what you think of as an executive function. He may call the legislature into an extraordinary or special session upon the request of 2/3 of both houses of the legislature, and he also must appear before the legislature at least once during each session to deliver a State of the State address, which he just did a few weeks ago. I'm really not going to talk about the judicial branch because here in Pima County we do not elect our judges. So by the Constitution of Arizona, if there is a county with a population of more than 250,000, the county, the state court judges, which would be Pima County Superior Court, are selected by a merit selection, and there's a whole process that you can look up. It's the same way the appellate court and the Supreme Court are chosen. Until November, there were 3 counties that did this. Coconino has now opted in. So there are 4 counties that do it this way and 11 counties that do partisan primaries and general elections for judges. What we do have in Pima County is the ability to say yay or nay on retaining judges. And there was a big brouhaha in November of people looking to see, well, this judge was appointed by this person, so I'm going to vote no. there has only been, I believe, 1 or maybe 2 judges not retained since this whole thing started in like in the 70s, I think. So it was a good protest vote, but not really, in my opinion, worth the effort. Okay, so we've blasted through the executive, we've blasted through the judiciary, so now we're going to talk about the legislature. Does anyone have any questions so far? Okay. The 54th legislature opened on Monday, January 14th, 2019. If you, this is the first session, next year will be the second session of the 54th legislature. There are 30 legislative districts in Arizona. Now, that is when you look at your little cheat sheet on so your legislative district is the second one from the left. So, there are 30 legislative districts, and each is what is called in political science a multi-member constituency. And what that means is, well, let's look at what the federal system is. You have senators from a large area, a state, and then you have representatives from congressional districts within that state. What the Arizona structure is, which is weird, of course, every state legislature is weird in its own way. There are a couple states that have this same thing. But what we have is a legislative district, say Legislative District 10, and the exact same number of citizens are voting for 2 representatives and 1 senator. So you would think that in that district that everyone would be the same party because the same people are electing them. But occasionally, like in LD10, you end up with a Democratic senator, a Democratic representative, and a Republican representative. Like the upper houses of other state and territorial legislatures and the U.S. Senate, the Senate, so there's the House of Representatives and the Senate can confirm or reject gubernatorial appointments, of which there are many. So I've heard it said that the governor has upwards of 2,000 appointments to make when he takes office. There's a lot to do there in terms of the Senate approving these. So 30 legislative districts, each one has 2 reps and 1 senator. So there are 60 reps and 30 senators, and every state senator and rep is assigned to at least 1 committee, and this becomes very important when you start learning about request to speak in terms of what your influence is when a bill is pending in committee. So one thing I want to point out is don't mix up your LD with your CD. We've all heard this, right? So your CD is your congressional district, your federal representative, and your LD is your state district. So the Speaker of the House is elected by the majority party caucus. The Speaker for the 54th legislature is Rusty Bowers. The Senate President, which in a state with a lieutenant governor would be the Senate President, the way the Vice President of the U.S. is the President of the Senate. But the Senate President in Arizona is elected by the Senate itself. There's also a Senate Pro Tem, President Pro Tem. Karen Fann is the Senate President of the 54th legislature. There's a 100-day legislature. Now, it doesn't sound very long until you realize that in New Mexico it's only 30 days. So in 2019, the legislative session is January 14 to 27. Now, that's projected. And that was about what it was projected to be last year, but there were a couple special sessions last year that pushed that end date out. There was the budgetary Red for Ed hoo-ha, but there was also a gun safety and an opioid special session. And when special sessions are called, the work of the legislature sort of stops and they work on that one thing. So they try to get through that quickly because they don't want to be going off into May because they're paid the same no matter what, and it isn't much, let me tell you. They are paid $24,000 for this work that they do, and it really is all year long, even though the session's only 100 days. So the way this works, in the life cycle of a piece of legislation, or bills are dropped, and that means they've been written during the summer or the fall, and they are introduced into either house of the legislature, and they have what's called a first reading. That sort of makes them live. Then, let's just talk about the House. It's the same in the Senate, but I'll use the terminology for the House. The Speaker of the House has a decision. Is he going to allow this bill to be heard? He doesn't have to, and the bill can just be put in his pocket and there it stays. And for all intents and purposes, it's dead. Now remember when I say it's dead, because you're going to find out that nothing's dead until it's really dead. So let's just say it's dead. Then, if he decides it is going to be heard, he can assign it to a committee. At least one committee, sometimes more. They all have to go through a rules committee, but there are other ones that are usually appropriate to the subject matter of the bill. Now, the vast majority of these bills never see the light of day. In 2018, 1,206 bills were introduced in regular session, which is a shocking number. Of that, 369 made their way through the process and 346 were signed by the governor. So that 1,206 bills, that down to 346. There is a very short deadline for introducing bills in the legislature. It's right now in the House, or is it in the Senate? Anyway, if they're a week apart, one's right in the middle of February, you can no longer introduce new bills. Now keep in your mind what I said about dead bills, just remember it, it's coming back. So, the Arizona Legislative Council writes all the bills, supposedly nonpartisan, let's call it nonpartisan. This goes on in the summer and the fall. So if I come, I say, I think I'm a citizen, and I say, I think there should be a bill where we don't feed onions to cows because it'll make the milk stinky. So I go to my representative, Brenna, and I say, Representative Brenna, I would really like to see this bill introduced. She would say, okay, let's look into this, do some research, and then it gets sent to the Legislative Council, who actually writes the legislation with the right words, and their lawyers, and et cetera. There's supposed to be a check at that point to see if it's constitutional. Let's just say that's what they do. That goes in through the summer and fall. These bills get dropped. Now, let's talk about committee. All right, let's talk about the House. There's a Republican majority of 1. So it's 31 to 29 in the House, Republicans to Democrats. That takes it one person to kill the majority. If there's a tie, it's dead. There's no tiebreaker. Arizona has not seen that kind of strength, Democratic strength in the House since 1966. The Senate is a 17 to 13 Republican majority, which means it only takes 2 to kill the majority in the Senate. That's 2 Republicans saying, I'm going to stand over here with the Democrats. So these are very slim margins. And so there are these committees in the House and in the Senate. And where are my numbers? Hold on a second. The Senate has 12 committees, and the House has, I think it's like 20 now. Yes, 20 House committees. And someone said, why are there so many committees? They said, because everyone wants to be a chair. So in these committees, every one of these committees has a Republican majority. And it's up to the chairman of the committee how many, what the balance is, what the proportion is. So every bill that goes to a committee is looking at a Republican majority. One thing I've learned from talking to legislators is how much horse trading goes on in this legislature. So say I have a bill and I have a friendly Republican colleague, and I can say, let's work together on these 2 bills. One is yours and one is mine. And so why don't you, Brenna, my Republican colleague, why don't you propose this bill? Because it's going to go farther being proposed by a Republican than it is by me, the Democrat. So that kind of stuff flips around. And there's a lot of thinking about this right now because these majorities are so slim. So there really has to be some horse trading. So look at the flow chart that you picked up in the handout table. This is called the Kill Bill Guide. You will see that, I think if you have the not black and white versions, do you have that on there?
I'm going to pull it up.
Okay. There's lots of citizen action. Each of these little bubbles that has a little arrow like a little talk bubble on a cartoon, those are citizen actions. Those are where you have a voice. But RTS only applies at a very, very specific point in this life cycle. And that is when a bill has been assigned to, not only assigned to a committee by the Speaker or by the President of the Senate, but assigned to a committee. Because he can, assigned to a committee and be on an agenda. Agenda is the word you want to remember. Because these bills can be assigned to committees, but if the committee chair doesn't want them to be heard, they will never be put on an agenda, and RTS will never be functioning there, and they will never be heard. They will die. And what did I say about bills dying? Are they really dead? No, they're not dead. So this is a very handy flow chart, because if you are following a piece of legislation, because RTS, there's actually two applications in RTS. One is called Bill Status Inquiry, and the other is RTS. And Brenna will go into a lot more detail about RTS, but Bill Status Inquiry will tell you where the bill is in this life cycle, so you can see, oh gee, oh gosh, this is a terrific bill and the speaker's not hearing it. You can call the speaker. It's not like us calling, you know, Nancy Pelosi or Paul Ryan or Mitch McConnell. You can call this legislator. They'll answer your phone. They'll take your number and they'll say, you'll say, I'm a citizen and I really think that this bill should be heard. Someone will note that and the speaker will hear about it. So it's the accessibility of our legislators, even the ones who aren't our elected legislators, is remarkable in a state situation, as opposed to the remoteness of federal legislatures. So does everybody sort of get that? So here's where it can die. It can die at the hands of the speaker. It can die at committee before it is put on an agenda. It can be heard in committee and there can be a vote not to hear it. It's dead then. And basically one committee death and it's gone. I mean, it's dead until it's not dead, but it's not going anywhere. If it doesn't get through the my onions and cows bill doesn't get through agriculture, it will never go through rules. I mean, it's dead. So let's say the bill does pass all the committees. It then goes to what's called the Committee of the Whole. You'll see it's all capital letters, C-O-W, like cow, as a matter of fact. And that means floor debate. And bills can be amended during COW, and that is when calling the actual legislators, your elected legislators, is very meaningful. Don't assume you know how they're going to vote, but call your legislators and say, thank you for fighting this, or thank you for supporting this. They need their feedback. So it's voted on by the House or Senate, it passes. And of course, if it passes in the House, it then flips over to the Senate. And we're very soon, in the next couple of weeks, reaching that point that where every bill that has passed the House is going to go be dumped over to the Senate, and the Senate bills are going to come dumping over to the House, and then they have to go through committee again. And so then RTS revs up again on the same bill. You thought, didn't I already see this? You did, but it was in the House. It's going to have the same number, but it's in the other chamber now. Okay, so that is that. So you'll see a reference in the bill status inquiry to first reading, second reading, third reading. What the first reading is that's what makes it alive at the hands of the speaker or the president. The second reading is considered to have happened in committee. The third reading is when they're going to do a vote, a floor vote on it. Now, what is important to know about this word reading, and this is another historical fact, is they don't actually read the bills. I talked to one of I think it was Kirsten Engel's admin at the legislature, who used to be a Senate page, and she was really in demand because the reading is simply saying Senate Bill 1079 and then the title really, really fast. That's it. And then she goes and she just reads this list. And so that sounded really funny. But in the historical times, people were coming from, you know, rural counties in Arizona, and they perhaps couldn't read. So back in the day, it really was a reading of the bill for people who didn't read or couldn't read well, which is very interesting. Okay, so let's talk about things that aren't really dead. So say we have, let's use the example of the Senate bill that was proposed by the senator from LD 14, David Gowan, on legalizing nunchucks. He's a martial arts instructor, and he thinks it's a Second Amendment issue that nunchucks should be legal. They're already legal for purposes of display. So what I heard a legislator suggest was that that is such an absurd bill on the face of it that it very possibly is going to be a vehicle for a strike-all amendment. Now, what a strike-all amendment is say my onions and cows thing, they were like, oh, well, that's just a stupid bill. But let's call that health and public safety. That's the element that it's in. But, oh, let's do this strike all, we're going to change it. It's going to have the same number, House Bill 2345, but now it's about transgender bathrooms, another issue of health and public safety in the minds of some people. So suddenly, this bill that never saw the light of day is whipping through committees, is on the floor being debated, and you thought, I thought that was good. So RTS, you have to go back in and you need to change your opinion of that bill. So there's been a rule change in the last 2 weeks in the legislature, the non-germane striker rule. So now it doesn't even have to remotely be in the same area as the original vehicle bill. So instead it could be like, oh, I don't think people should have red cars. Okay, that never saw the light of day. Suddenly it's a transgender bathroom bill. So you have to be very careful. And so Brenda's going to talk about how you can be careful, because there's no way us sitting in Tucson, being just regular citizens, can track this legislation. There are people who are paid money to be up there in Phoenix digesting this information for us. And there's a huge variety of legislative alerts, legislative updates that come out on the weekend, on Friday night or Sunday night, that gives you your roadmap of what is on committee and other things that aren't in committee but are worthy of your attention, phone calls, emails, that sort of thing. And Brenda will talk about a lot of them. There was a little half sheet or third sheet of paper back there that has some of these legislative alerts where you can get them as email updates, or you can go to a website and look at them, but it's definitely something to consider looking at. I have a printed out version of one of them if you want to see what it looks like. But those are the people, you just have to decide what organizations you're going to trust. You're going to trust the Sierra Club on environmental issues, then get there a legislative update. If you're going to look at civic engagement beyond voting, social justice issues, or the UJAZ, which is the Unitarian Church, they do social justice issues, the gun safety alerts, whatever you can't keep track of everything. Pick the things you want to keep track of and then put your power into RTS from that. It's gone through both houses, it's come out of committee, it's been voted on, and of course both houses must pass identical versions, which is why the budget passed so fast, and the Red for Ed hoo-ha, even though people were just saying, oh, let's do this amendment and let's do that amendment. They couldn't put any amendments because they were coming down to the deadline, and the words have to be exactly the same. So let's say our bill passes, identical versions of the bill, it is sent to the governor. He then has, within 5 days, he has 3 choices. He signs the bill into law, he can veto the bill, or he can do nothing, in which case the bill becomes law without his signature. And people say, well, why would that be? And I don't know what the historical reason for it, but the reality is it's plausible deniability that a bill may have passed because he knew that they would just override his veto, and maybe he doesn't want his name on it, but nevertheless, that can happen. So strike all amendments are very strange, and you can actually look up, in 2018, 123 strikers were proposed. 107 of them were adopted, though. So that's very interesting, considering only 300 and some bills went to the governor. 107 of them were strike-alls. I think that's the way I read that. You can see that information on azleg.gov. If you go to bills, it says strike all amendments or strikers, or there's a word like that, and you can go in and you can see what those bills were that were passed. So this comes back to what Brenda and I realized we didn't know. Like, are there a lot of these, or are there just a few of these? Turns out there's a lot of them. So that's pretty interesting. Okay, so your influence in the legislature is according to this Kill Bill guide. You could call it Kill Bill, or you could call it Promote Bill, depending on what the bill is. What is happening right now in the legislature is very strange. Kirsten Engel pointed this out to us. Very few bills, very few Democratic bills are getting past the Speaker of the House. He is holding them because he says he only wants to promote bills or to pass on bills that he feels certain that the governor is going to sign. Does this sound like anybody else we know? Does it sound like Mitch McConnell? To me, it sounds like Mitch McConnell. So there's a dearth of bills at the moment. I mean, they're not making it into committee. This is nothing like it was last year, where I was spending 4 hours every Monday morning on RTS just clicking until my fingers were in flames. There's just not that much to comment on right now. It's kind of crazy. Okay, so that is that. The azleg.gov is a great little website. It's the official website of the legislature. You can find your legislator, you can look at bills, you can get your request to speak that way. But I do want to just talk about two more things that I feel are very important. I said there were 3 branches of the government. There is a fourth, they call it Quasi Executive, but I don't think it is Quasi Executive. It is its own branch of the government, Article 15 of the Arizona Constitution. It is the Arizona Corporation Commission. And this was originally a commission that was in the, this was 1912, this was the antitrust era. This was to set carriage rates of railroad carriage across the state. It was for railroad safety. And of course, in the 20th century, it became the Securities and Exchange Commission, essentially, for the state, regulating the corporation of businesses and organizations. But what is really key to us right now is it regulates public utility companies. And these are water, electricity, natural gas, and telephone, including final decisions on granting or denying rate adjustments. So my second little dip into, after talking about direct democracy, my little dip into political science is regulatory capture. And if you look up regulatory capture, there'll practically be a picture of the Arizona Corporation Commission in there. So originally, it's very interesting that the Constitution explicitly calls for an elected commission, which was expanded from 3 to 5 commissioners in 2000, because a governor-appointed commission they were afraid was going to be corrupt. This is the point we all laugh. So we have an elected one, which is also corrupt. And I say that only because, as of 2 years ago, 4 out of the 5 commissioners were under federal investigation. And what they're under investigation for is taking money from the parent companies, like election funds, campaign funds, from the companies that own Arizona Public Service and Tucson Electric Power and whatever else there is. Now, I have to say I'm pretty ignorant about how these local electrical rural cooperatives work, but I believe they're also under the Arizona Corporation Commission. So if I go talk in Cochise County, I'm going to step aside and let somebody else talk about those. But what is very important is the people we elect to that, who, by the way, let's see, what kind of standards do you have to be on the Corporation Commission? 18 years old, a citizen of the United States, and able to speak English. That is what your requirement is. So they come from all over the place. They can be businessmen, they could be lawyers, they can be any number of different kinds of people. So every person who pays an electric bill or a water bill is affected by these rate-setting rules. Now, they can change the rate so they only get $3 or $4 extra from a person. But what does that translate into over millions of ratepayers? A lot of money. So what is important here is for us to pay attention to those Arizona Corporation Commission elections. They're down at the bottom of the ballot, because you want to be sure that you're voting for somebody who is going to carry the standard of your values. Say you believe in renewable energy, you believe in not coal-fired electricity, which is what we have here in Tucson. You want to be looking for people who are more progressive, who are looking for, I'm kind of preaching here, but if you believe in that sort of way forward with climate change, you want to be looking for Arizona Corporation Commissioners who also believe that and promote things like big solar and big wind, so that we don't end up with coal-fired electrical plants. It was all Republican, but a Democrat, Sandra Kennedy, was elected to the ACC in November of 2018, and she has been on the commission before. She's on it again. Okay, so one more quick thing. I'm still good here. Arizona Independent Redistricting Commission, the IRC. Now, this is the shining star of the Arizona government, and I say that with I'm not being funny. It is the gold standard of redistricting in this country. And if you look at, there's a website that I believe I put on the links. It's the National Council of State Legislatures, CSL.org, there is some research there talking about what the standards of redistricting are in all the states. And I think at least 5 states in this last election used Arizona as a model of what they were putting forth to their voters to make their redistricting commissions like. And what makes it so different is this. The U.S. Constitution requires a census every 10 years and mandates that congressional districts be examined after each census and redrawn as necessary to ensure equitable representation. The gerrymandering we see everywhere, but we do not see in Arizona, those crazy-looking congressional districts, are when the party in power maneuvers this so that, for instance, if you have a minority population, you jam them all into one so that they get their one vote, they get their representative, but their power is not spread over 5 congressional districts, it's jammed into one. And believe me, the Republicans are not the only people who have done this. Maryland's problem is of Democratic origin. So in 2000, there was Prop 106, which was a proposition to change the Arizona Constitution to take the redistricting power away from the legislature. The legislature filed suit, not once, but I think twice. But the structure of this commission has withstood 2 U.S. Supreme Court challenges because the legislature was saying, oh no, the Constitution says it's got to be in the legislature, and the Supreme Court, and I can give you the case, said no, you know what, this meets the standard. This is the people talking. So the way it works is that every 10 years the Redistricting Commission is reconstituted, and there are 2 Democrats and there are 2 Republicans, and the 4 of them elect a registered independent to be the chair. Now, our legislature, because this is a constitutional amendment, our legislature is constantly, last year they're doing it, this year they're doing it, trying to float another constitutional amendment to change this, to water this down, to make it 9 people, to make it, whatever it is they're trying to make it. And they failed spectacularly last year, and I think they're probably going to fail again. So they meet, they redraw from scratch Arizona's congressional, federal, and legislative state districts to reflect the results of the latest census. And that starting from scratch is what's important, so they're not just signing off on what we did last time. So it is now dissolved. It will be appointed in 2021 after the next census. And there is, if you go to azredistricting.org, there's a nice little historical page there where you can read about how this happened. I think it's HCR 2002 is the one that is the one they're trying to do this time. So get on request to speak and tell them what you think. One more thing, of course, we know we have ballot initiatives and referenda. This is a good little factoid to know. If you see something starting with a 1, like Proposition 105, that is a constitutional amendment. The 1s are the constitutional amendments. Initiated legislation starts with a 2, Prop 207. Repeal referendum, Prop 305, they start with 3s. And then locals start with 4s. So you'll see city, state, city and county ballot issues starting with the 400 series. Okay, so that's a lot of stuff. And I just want to remind you that I knew almost none of this 2 years ago. This is not rocket science. It is simply a relatively intelligent person with a need to know. And the links that I've given you, you can delve into anything. My only advice is do not try to master everything. Just find something that you're really interested in and delve into it and become like your local expert and amaze your friends and family. Thank you.